Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we take complex research, those really pivotal moments in history, and, sharp analysis to give you the knowledge you need fast.
That's right. We know your goal is to get informed quickly, but also thoroughly. And today, we're diving into a story that's, well, it's pretty uncomfortable. It sits right where true crime, industry, and sort of societal trauma all collide.
Yeah, absolutely. We're tackling the 1982 Tylenol murders. And this isn't really just about who did it, because honestly, that mystery is still unsolved.
Yeah.
It's much more about the huge, immediate changes this one event forced on American business and on our collective psyche. Our mission here is to look at how this single terrifying crime just shattered consumer trust, completely reshaped global safety standards, redefined corporate ethics, and really left a permanent mark on how we interact with, everyday products.
We're drawing on a pretty comprehensive essay for this one. It blends the true crime history with some really deep dives into the psychological side, the business analysis. And for you listening, I think the most critical idea to get right from the start is this. This wasn't just a physical crime against 7 people. It was fundamentally, as the source puts it, a crime against trust itself.
That really nails it, doesn't it? I mean, think about the world before September 1982. If you bought a known product, a brand you recognized, right there on a drugstore shelves, you just believed, almost without thinking, that it was safe, like completely safe by default.
Yeah, that implicit trust.
That feeling of just passive safety. That's really what died here.
And the crime, it just laid bare how vulnerable that faith actually made everyone.
Okay, let's rewind. Picture it. Fall 1982, Chicago. Crisp autumn air, leaves changing. But that calm just gets instantly shattered. Within days, this wave of fear starts spreading. Faster, wider than any police investigation could keep up with initially.
It was just an unimaginable series of events, and it struck the most ordinary people, doing the most mundane things. 7 people died. The terror, it kicked off with Mary Kellerman, just 12 years old, took an extra-strength Tylenol for a cold, and she died.
God, 12 years old.
Yeah. And then right after, a young postal worker died, a flight attendant. And maybe the most heartbreaking part was this cluster of deaths in one family, the Janus family.
Tell us about that, because it really highlights the sheer horror of it all.
Well, Adam Janus, he was a postal worker. He died first. Then his family, they gather later that day to mourn him, right? And completely unknowingly, they take Tylenol capsules from the same contaminated bottle that was in his house.
Oh, no.
Yeah. His brother, Stanley Janus, and Stanley's wife, Teresa, they both died soon after. So you have this 12-year-old, a postal worker, a flight attendant, and then 3 members of one family. It just made the threat feel so random, so inescapable. It showed how insidious, how indiscriminate this poison really was.
And what made it so effective and, so terrifying was just how simple the method was. Low tech, but horrifically targeted.
That is the key insight, absolutely. The contamination. It was done just by opening standard bottles of extra-strength Tylenol capsules, the ones you'd buy anywhere, replacing some of the powder inside with high-potency cyanide, and then just putting the bottles back on the shelves.
Just like that?
Just like that. The source calls it a horrifyingly simple crime. The person, whoever it was, didn't need complex gear, didn't need access to the factory or the supply chain. They just needed, time, the poison itself, and the sheer nerve to return those tampered bottles right back to the store.
And the amount of poison.
Yeah.
When you look at the actual chemistry involved, the destructive power is just staggering for such a small amount.
It really is. The total quantity of cyanide needed to kill those 7 people, to basically paralyze the nation with fear. The sources estimate it was less than 10 grams in total, spread across those different bottles.
Less than 10 grams. That's hard to fathom.
And that tiny amount, it just amplified the psychological impact, didn't it? It proved that you could cause maximum devastation with minimal effort if you targeted something people trusted implicitly. And cyanide, it's incredibly fast-acting. It stops your body's cells from using oxygen. Death is quick, violent. The victims, they really had almost no chance once they took it. It just hammered home how helpless consumers were against this invisible threat.
The vulnerability of the whole system just became blindingly obvious really fast. Let's walk through the key timeline points that escalated this from, a local Chicago issue to a national crisis.
Okay, so September 29th, 1982. That's the day we see the first known deaths, Mary Kellerman and Adam Janus. Within just 48 hours, the medical examiners, the investigators, they start connecting the dots. They realize this isn't just a series of tragic, isolated medical events. It's coordinated poisoning. And it's linked to this one. Very common, very trusted product.
And that realization forced Johnson & Johnson's hand. By October 1st, Just 2 days after those first deaths hit the news, they made a truly historic decision.
They did. They issued this massive nationwide recall. It was the very first of its kind in American corporate history. They pulled, get this, 31 million bottles of Tylenol off shelves everywhere, across the whole country.
31 million. Just think about the logistics of that. Deciding and acting within hours, really, of the public understanding the scale of this.
Exactly. The operational challenge was immense.
And the significance. You just can't overstate it. Before this case, things like tamper-evident seals, child-proof caps on medicine, they were rare. Very rare. We were living in a totally different consumer world.
Precisely. This event, it really marked the definitive end of the innocent consumer era. That unspoken agreement, between the company making the product and the person buying it. That assumption of good faith, of passive safety, it was just irrevocably broken. From that point on, consumers had to be actively watchful.
Okay, so that pivot leads us straight into what's become like one of the most studied chapters in modern business history, the corporate response. Johnson & Johnson's handling of this crisis. It's still taught today, isn't it, as the gold standard of corporate integrity?
It absolutely is. And that reputation, that standard, it was really set because of the speed and, crucially, the transparency of their reaction. Instead of doing what many corporations might have done, then, circle the wagons, delay, try to downplay the scope.
Wow.
J&J put human lives first.
Right away.
Above everything else.
Above everything else. There's a business ethicist mentioned in the source, Lawrence Weiss, who emphasizes how rare that was in corporate America back in the early 80s. J&J didn't just try to manage the PR crisis with spin, they acted decisively, took direct action to remove the threat from the public. Okay, but let's inject a little critical thinking here. While their response is rightly praised, weren't there some critics, even back then, who kind of suggested that this huge, very public recall, costing them over $100 million in lost product, remediation, everything, wasn't it also a very clever, maybe even calculated move? A way to completely dominate the PR story and protect their market share in the long run.
That's a really crucial point to raise in a deep dive like this. And yes, absolutely. While the company framed it publicly as a purely ethical decision, and fundamentally it was, they took a massive short-term hit. That move also served an incredibly powerful strategic purpose.
How so?
By being the most proactive, the most transparent, the company willing to sacrifice the most profit immediately, they basically cemented Tylenol, or J&J rather, as the brand the public could still trust when the dust settled. They set the bar so high, any competitor who might have hesitated or done less would have looked negligent, even callous by comparison.
Wow.
So yes, it was absolutely the right ethical choice. And it also turned out to be a masterstroke in securing their long-term brand value and consumer loyalty.
So the calculated risk management was essentially, well, it was a long-term investment in their brand's integrity, proving that sometimes doing the right thing is actually the smartest business decision.
Exactly. And that decisive action, it immediately translated into a physical revolution, like literally changing the way products looked and felt on the shelf.
Let's get into that physical change. What exactly did J&J introduce that so fundamentally altered how we interact with medicine packaging?
Okay, so J&J pioneered and quickly rolled out what became known as the triple seal technology. This wasn't just one thing. It was a deliberate 3-layered defense system designed specifically to make any potential tampering instantly obvious to a consumer. You'd know if someone had messed with it.
Okay, break down those 3 layers for us. What were people seeing for the first time on those shelves?
Right. So first, you had the glued box flap. The outer cardboard box wasn't just tucked closed anymore, it was glued shut. You had to physically tear it to get inside.
Okay, layer 1.
Layer 2. Inside the box, the plastic bottle itself now had an external plastic safety seal, usually clear plastic wrapped around the cap and neck. Often it had perforations, so you had to break that seal, tear it off just to get the cap off.
Right, I can picture that.
And then layer 3, the final barrier. Once you got the cap off, there was a foil wrapper, heat sealed directly across the mouth of the bottle. You had to puncture and peel that off to get to the actual capsules or tablets.
That foil seal.
Yeah.
It's so common now, we barely notice it. But that was revolutionary back then.
Absolutely revolutionary. It was like the ultimate visual and physical reassurance. Before this, often a bottle was just capped, maybe with some cotton inside, and dropped into a box you could easily open and close. Suddenly, you had these 3 distinct physical barriers you had to tear, then click or twist through a seal, then peel. It was a massive shift. Every single time you buy medicine, or even some food items today, and you peel off that foil seal, you are directly interacting with the legacy of the 1982 Tylenol murders. The costs, the R&D, the retooling for the entire pharmaceutical and food packaging industry to adopt these standards, it was enormous. But the public demanded it. It became non-negotiable.
And the change wasn't just companies doing it voluntarily. It quickly became law, didn't it? The government had to step in, seeing how widespread the fear was.
Exactly. Congress recognized this was a national security issue, in a way, then moved quickly, passing a really critical piece of legislation in 1983, the Federal Anti-Tampering Act.
What did that act actually do? What were the practical consequences?
Well, it established really tough legal precedents. It made product tampering a serious federal crime, carrying severe penalties even if nobody was actually harmed or killed. It essentially wrote into law the new reality. Manufacturers now had a legal duty to use tamper-evident packaging.
So it codified what J&J had started.
Precisely. And importantly, it didn't just affect U.S. companies. By raising the standards so dramatically here, it forced global awareness. Companies everywhere had to confront these new responsibilities around product safety, supply chain security. It really put the issue on the map internationally. So the response was this powerful combination of, voluntary corporate action, rapid technological innovation, and then mandatory government regulation locking it all in place.
Okay, so we've covered the physical changes, the new laws. But the shadow of this case, it stretches way deeper into psychology. How do you even measure the cost of losing that kind of fundamental trust?
That's the invisible damage, isn't it? And if we connect this to the broader psychological impact, this crime really felt like psychological warfare. It caused mass paranoia. It led to what sociologists call collective trauma. Think about it. The killer didn't just attack people. They attacked the most trusted, intimate space, your home medicine cabinet. They turned the most benign, familiar object into a potential weapon, a silent one.
It became a sort of textbook example in behavioral science pretty quickly, didn't it? Specifically around this idea of the availability heuristic. Can we maybe unpack that concept a bit for listeners?
Sure. The availability heuristic. It's a concept that came from psychologists Swirsky and Kahneman back in the 70s. It basically describes a mental shortcut our brains take. We tend to judge how likely or risky something is based on how easily and vividly we can recall examples of it.
Okay, can you give us a clear comparison? How does that work in practice?
Yeah, the classic example is flying versus driving. Statistically, you are much more likely to die in a car accident than a plane crash. But plane crashes, when they happen, are huge news. They're dramatic, terrifying, visually striking. They dominate headlines for days.
Right.
So because that image of a plane crash is so vivid and easily available in our memory, people often feel like flying is riskier than driving, even though the odds are the opposite.
Gotcha. So applying that to Tylenol, the constant news coverage, images of police seizing bottles, frightened families being interviewed, it made the risk of being poisoned feel immediate, universal, almost statistically inevitable, even though it wasn't.
Exactly that. The news was emotionally loaded, visually disturbing, happening right now. People weren't thinking about the tiny statistical chance of finding one of the few tampered bottles out of millions. They were reacting to the unforgettable, terrifying image of those poison capsules. And that led people to feel like all over-the-counter drugs, maybe even all packaged food, was suddenly dangerous.
And that level of anxiety was so intense it actually manifested physically for some people, right?
Yeah.
Leading to documented cases of mass psychogenic illness or MPI.
Yes, we saw significant reports of MPI. This is where people feel genuinely physically sick, nausea, headaches, dizziness, intense anxiety, basically classic poisoning symptoms, after taking perfectly safe, untampered medicine.
Just from fear.
Just from fear and the power of suggestion, fueled by that nonstop media coverage. It was strong enough to trick the brain into producing real physical symptoms, even though toxicology tests would later confirm that they hadn't ingested anything harmful at all.
Wow. How did ERs even try to tell the difference between MPI and actual poisoning during the peak of the crisis? That must have been chaos.
It was incredibly difficult, especially at first, and it put a huge strain on medical resources. Doctors had to rely heavily on, taking a detailed patient history, seeing how the symptoms progressed. Real cyanide poisoning causes severe, rapid systemic collapse. MPI symptoms would persist, feel real, but they wouldn't escalate in that life-threatening way. Still, the sheer number of anxious people showing up with possible symptoms meant valuable time and resources were diverted from other emergencies.
This loss of faith, it just went so deep, it led to that fundamental permanent change where consumers started actively questioning, do corporations really care more about profit than my safety? It completely reshaped consumer culture.
And to really get the intensity of this trauma, you have to look at the wider context. What was going on sociologically in the early 1980s? This didn't happen in a vacuum. It landed in a period that was already soaked in a kind of cultural paranoia.
That's true. The 80s, they weren't exactly carefree, were they?
Not at all. You had huge anxieties already swirling around. The AIDS crisis was just emerging, fueling fears about invisible contamination, threats to the body. You had high crime rates dominating city news, and of course the Cold War was still very much on, creating this deep background hum of political unease, potential annihilation.
Right.
The Tylenol murders just tapped right into those existing fears. It crystallized them. It proved that danger could arrive silently, randomly, and in the places you felt safest, from things you trusted most.
And what about within communities? How did everyday life actually change on the ground?
We saw immediate behavioral shifts, things like neighborhood watch groups. Traditionally, they were focused on preventing burglaries, right? Street crime. Suddenly, they expanded their focus. They started organizing specifically around vigilance against tampered goods. People became hyper-aware, checking seals meticulously, comparing package sizes, even watching strangers linger in the pharmacy aisles.
Did people just throw stuff out?
Oh, absolutely. Huge numbers of people just cleared out their medicine cabinets entirely, threw out all their over-the-counter medications, not just Tylenol, which ironically led to temporary shortages of other drugs and created massive problems with how to dispose of all this potentially hazardous waste safely.
And the media. While you could argue they fanned the flames of hysteria, they also played a crucial role in forcing action, didn't they?
They did. The media coverage, as relentless and maybe sometimes sensationalist as it was, performed a vital function. It forced immediate accountability from both Johnson & Johnson and the government. They simply couldn't ignore a story that big, that terrifying, which meant corporations and legislators had absolutely no choice but to act, and act fast, to try and contain both the physical danger and the spiraling psychological crisis. So despite all these massive changes, the packaging revolution, the new laws, the shift in corporate ethics, we still have to confront the most uncomfortable fact about this case. The killer, or killers, were never actually caught. The story just lacks that final chapter, that moral closure.
It's the fact that just hangs over the whole legacy, isn't it? And the source is confirmed. The investigations went on for decades, from the initial panic in '82 right through '84. Task forces revisited it periodically, even using modern forensics, advanced DNA testing as recently as 2020. But still, no one has ever been formally charged for the 7 murders themselves.
For many, many years, the main person of interest, the prime suspect in the public eye at least, was a man named James W. Lewis. Now, it's really crucial to be precise about his connection to the case. He was convicted, he did serve prison time, but not for the killings.
What was he convicted for, then?
Lewis was found guilty of sending a very detailed extortion letter, a ransom note, directly to Johnson & Johnson. In it, he demanded $1 million to make the killing stop.
$1 million. What did the note say?
It apparently detailed how the killings were being done, implying he knew things only the killer would know, and threatened more deaths unless the money was paid. He claimed, I think, to be part of some group behind it. But while he served over a decade in prison for extortion based on that letter, he always maintained his innocence regarding the actual act of tampering with the capsules and placing the bottles on the shelves.
And investigators could never link him physically.
They spent years trying to connect him to buying cyanide, trying to place him near the specific stores where the tainted bottles were bought. But ultimately, the physical evidence just wasn't strong enough to bring murder charges against him, or anyone else for that matter.
Which underscores the enduring mystery. But it also lets us push back a bit against one of the early, really pervasive media myths. Those first news reports, they generated enormous nationwide panic, partly by claiming the killer was targeting victims completely randomly all across the country.
Oh, that myth was incredibly effective at spreading terror, the idea that any bottle, anywhere, could be poisoned. But later, when investigators did a more granular analysis, looking at exactly where the tampered bottles were purchased or recovered, a more nuanced picture emerged. Most of them, the ones they could trace, came from a surprisingly narrow geographic cluster, mostly within the Chicago metropolitan area.
So that suggests maybe localized intent rather than a completely random nationwide attack?
That's the distinction investigators lean towards now. While the victims themselves were random, they had no connection to the killer. The placement of the poison products seems to have been geographically focused. The killer likely targeted specific drugstores, specific supermarkets within a fairly tight radius, which suggests they knew the area, or lived or worked nearby. It doesn't lessen the horror for those affected, but it slightly changes the profile from a totally random national menace to someone acting with more localized knowledge.
But tragically, the national scope of the news coverage, even if the initial crime was localized, led to this devastating secondary effect, the contagion effect.
Yes, this is such a grim consequence of high-profile crime coverage. The intense panic, the wall-to-wall media attention given to the Tylenol case, it inadvertently provided a kind of blueprint, a how-to for other disturbed individuals seeking attention or wanting to cause harm by exploiting that same vulnerability. The source material is startling here. It notes that in just the few months immediately following the initial Tylenol deaths, over 270 copycat incidents were reported across the U.S.
Over 270. That number is just astonishing.
It really illustrates the power of that contagion effect. These incidents ranged from actual attempts at contaminating products, thankfully often caught, to simple hoaxes designed to cause panic. It forced retailers, police, the FDA into this constant state of high alert long after the immediate Tylenol crisis seemed contained. The nation now knew it was vulnerable in this way, and sadly, some people realized how easily that fear could be weaponized.
And the most tragic proof that this fear, this vulnerability, was real and enduring came 4 years later, didn't it? In 1986.
Yes, the awful death of Diane Ellsworth in New York. She died after taking cyanide-laced Excedrin capsules, a different product, a different pain reliever made by a different company, Bristol-Myers. But the method was chillingly similar. Her death confirmed that the national trauma from '82 hadn't just faded away. The vulnerability exposed by the Tylenol killer was still there, still being exploited. It proved the need for that new packaging, that constant vigilance was absolutely permanent.
We should probably also just briefly touch on the fringe theories that inevitably pop up in cases like this. The idea that maybe the contamination didn't happen on the shelves, but somewhere back in the Tylenol supply chain itself, like maybe disgruntled employees or corporate sabotage.
It's worth mentioning them because those theories definitely circulated, especially early on when people were desperate for answers and couldn't believe someone could just walk into a store and do this. But it's also really important to state clearly, absolutely no credible evidence has ever surfaced to support internal contamination. All the forensic work, the pattern of distribution, the nature of the tampering itself, it all overwhelmingly points towards external tampering. Someone buying the bottles, taking them away, altering them, and then returning them to store shelves. The supply chain theory just doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
All right, so since the killer remains this faceless enigma, the academic world, particularly forensic psychology, has spent decades trying to figure out the why. What was the motivation behind such an attack? What did the experts think?
Well, Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who's a very well-known forensic psychologist, has suggested the killer was likely driven less by a specific grudge against the victims or even direct financial gain, despite the Lewis ransom note, and more by deep-seated feelings needing revenge or thrill-seeking directed at society itself. She believes the profile fits what's sometimes called a mission-oriented psychopath.
Okay, let's break that down. Mission-oriented. What does that specifically imply about their mindset?
It suggests the killer's main goal wasn't personal enrichment or settling a specific score. Their mission was to cause widespread disruption, to shatter public trust, to expose the fragility they perceived in modern society. Think about the immense personal risk involved in tampering with products and then putting them back in public stores.
Right, the chance of being caught seems huge.
Exactly. The high risk taken, combined with the complete lack of personal connection to the victims, and the very deliberate targeting of the consumer system itself, a trusted brand, readily available, all points towards this type of mission. Sow chaos, sow fear, make a statement on a massive scale.
So it was really a crime designed to terrify an entire nation, a statement about vulnerability itself. Philip Jenkins, the criminologist, he built on this idea, didn't he? Arguing that the Tylenol murders basically created a whole new kind of public fear.
Jenkins made a compelling case that this event reshaped how the public thought about crime. He argued it created fear of crimes committed by faceless strangers through ordinary means. It's the ultimate violation of the mundane, the everyday. The fear is no longer just about, getting mugged in a dark alley. Suddenly, the danger could be right there in the brightly lit aisle of your local pharmacy, hidden inside a product you bought without a second thought.
And the specific fear, despite all the changes in packaging and laws. It feels like it's never entirely disappeared, has it? We're, over 40 years later? But that risk of invisible, random contamination seems to keep finding new ways to surface.
Absolutely. Think about the direct parallels later on. The 2001 anthrax attacks, for instance, they immediately brought back those exact same feelings: invisible danger lurking in the mail system, another trusted everyday delivery mechanism suddenly turned deadly.
Yeah, I remember that fear very clearly.
And even today, forget digital tampering for a second. Just look at traditional product recalls and scares, whether it's E. coli in lettuce, salmonella in peanut butter, or these sophisticated rings selling fake, potentially harmful medicines online. These incidents still trigger widespread anxiety. It shows that the underlying psychological wound from 1982, that breach of trust, it never fully healed. We're just more aware now, perhaps.
We usually focus on the American side of things, but the source material gets into the global ripple effects too.
Yeah.
Were there surprising differences in how, say, Japan or Europe reacted compared to the US?
That's a really interesting aspect. The reaction definitely varied, often based on existing cultural attitudes towards trust, safety, and regulation. Take Japan, for example. They already had a very high cultural value placed on product quality, safety, meticulousness. So for them, the Tylenol crisis didn't so much change their approach as confirm it. They quickly adopted similar triple seal packaging standards and really doubled down on consumer education about verifying product authenticity. It fit their existing mindset.
In Europe, you mentioned earlier they were resistant initially.
Europe generally showed more initial resistance, yeah. There was a stronger cultural pushback against what many saw as over-packaging. The arguments often centered on the environmental cost, all that extra plastic, the cardboard waste. There was also maybe a bit more skepticism, a feeling that such elaborate packaging was more about companies covering their liability than genuine necessity. However, over time, after experiencing their own localized scares, food contaminations, medicine issues, European regulators did gradually shift towards requiring more robust safety features, though maybe not always as elaborate as the full US-style triple seal initially.
Okay, and what about in developing economies? Was the takeaway different again there?
Yes, very different context, different takeaway. In regions maybe facing more fundamental safety challenges already, think parts of South Asia or Latin America, the Tylenol story is still actively used today, but in a slightly different way. It's often brought up in public health campaigns. But there, the main concern isn't usually random external tampering like the Chicago case. It's more about the pervasive problem of counterfeit medicines or products being intentionally adulterated with cheaper or incorrect ingredients by fraudulent manufacturers.
Oh, okay.
So in those contexts, the Tylenol story serves as a powerful cautionary tale to promote consumer vigilance against any kind of uncertainty about their medicine. It encourages people to buy from reputable sources, check expiry dates, look for signs of poor quality.
So the core message, the cultural takeaway, really varied. In the US, the crisis became this symbol of corporate responsibility, what a good ethical company should do in a crisis. But elsewhere, especially in places battling counterfeits, the story symbolized something else, more like modern vulnerability. The idea that our complex globalized systems inherently introduce these hidden threats that demand constant watchfulness from everyone. All right, so to bring this whole deep dive together, we need that balanced perspective. We have to acknowledge the undeniable strengths that came out of this tragedy, but also look honestly at the weaknesses, the dangers that still linger. Let's start with the positives, the undisputed good outcomes.
The strengths are definitely profound, and they've lasted. The Tylenol crisis, without question, transformed corporate crisis management standards around the world. It set that gold standard for acting quickly, transparently, ethically. It massively raised mandatory global awareness about product safety, and crucially, it led to those key legal protections through the federal Anti-Tampering Act. Those are huge positives.
But, like any massive shift, there are always unintended consequences, right? What were the significant weaknesses or downsides that emerged from this whole safety revolution?
Well, the main one we touched on with the European reaction is the environmental cost. That sudden, intense demand for absolute, undeniable tamper-proofing led directly to this explosion in packaging, much more plastic, multi-layered boxes, etc. It definitely accelerated the problem of packaging waste, which, we're still wrestling with in a big way today.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, the other fundamental weakness, the one that never goes away in this story, is that the killer was never caught. That leaves this huge hole in the narrative. There's no final justice, no complete moral closure for the victims' families, or for society, really.
And we also need to think critically about the dangers inherent in how these kinds of tragedies play out in the public eye, in the media spotlight.
Absolutely. It's always a really delicate balance. Media sensationalism, While you could argue it's necessary to galvanize immediate action and warn the public, it also carries that inherent risk of inspiring copycats. We saw that directly with the 270-plus incidents. That's a real danger. Furthermore, public fear, when it gets detached from rational data and fueled by constant alarming headlines, can lead to really irrational consumer behavior, like throwing out perfectly good medicine, causing shortages, or even broader market instability and unnecessary economic disruption. Managing that fear is as critical as managing the physical threat.
Okay, so if we synthesize this whole journey, we started with this horrific localized tragedy in Chicago, and we ended up witnessing a global paradigm shift in safety, in corporate ethics, and consumer awareness. What's the ultimate takeaway? What does this story really mean during all these decades later?
I think it endures because the Tylenol murders strike right at a universal, deeply buried human fear. It's that unsettling realization that danger, extreme danger, can come from the most familiar, most trusted things in our daily lives. The case wasn't just history. In many ways, it feels profoundly prophetic.
Prophetic? How so? Because the nature of tampering changes.
Exactly. Prophetic because in our world today, which is infinitely more complex, tampering might not be chemical cyanide in a capsule. It might be digital hacking into critical infrastructure. It could be sophisticated supply chain infiltration, introducing flaws miles away from the consumer. It could be ransomware attacking hospitals, or even massive disinformation campaigns designed to attack our trust in vital systems like vaccines or food safety processes, rather than attacking a physical bottle.
So the vulnerability isn't gone, it just morphs.
Precisely. The absolute fragility of societal trust, which is the bedrock of commerce, of daily life, it was just completely laid bare in 1982. And the threats to that trust continue to evolve.
It's a stark reminder, then, that safety is never a finished state. It's not static. It has to constantly evolve, constantly adapt to keep pace with human ingenuity, whether that ingenuity is used for good or, unfortunately, for evil. It feels like a never-ending race between protection and exploitation.
Well put. It's an ongoing process, not a destination.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful, if unsettling, look back. Thank you for guiding us through such a pivotal and still resonant moment in modern history.
You know, the Tylenol murders. They started out as a mystery about finding a killer, but in the end, maybe they became more of a mirror reflecting us our deepest fears, the nature of our trust, and ultimately our faith in the complex systems we build, systems built by humans for humans. It's maybe a realization that every safety seal you break, every regulation passed, it's just a tangible reminder of a collective decision that we simply couldn't live with that level of raw vulnerability again.
A powerful thought to leave with. We definitely encourage you, our listeners, to keep exploring these intersections: corporate ethics, public psychology, safety, trust on your own. We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.